Namaste and welcome, dear friends. I hope your week since we last met has been a good one, that you remain healthy and happy, and that you realize the fullness of all that you are. Oh, would that be wonderful for all of us, for sure. Well, welcome to episode 2 of With Eyes to See. And episode 2 happens to correspond with the first chapter in the book that follows our introduction. And the heading for this chapter is Creating Our Heaven or Hell. Whoa, here we go. As Joseph Campbell so adeptly points us to in Myths to Live By, the point about hell, as heaven, is this. When there, you finally are in your proper place, which finally is exactly where you want to be. That sounds weird, I know. Just pay attention. We are where we are today because of the total impact life's content, events, and circumstances have had on our mind, body, emotions, and soul. How we have chosen to let our mind interpret that storehouse of information for everyday living gives us either our heaven or our hell, or some blend of both. It's all up to us. That's what's to understand. I have this image of sitting on a large boulder in the middle of a beautiful stream we call life, carefully watching for those aspects that seem most pertinent to my inner depths, plucking them out of the stream to be used for my highest good, then replacing them that another may benefit along their own journey. In this sense, life impacts us only in the ways we choose to experience it. Life itself is not experienced, contrary to popular view. We are that which gives experience to what this river called life brings to us. The experience we give to all of life is our intent or nature, our attitude toward life and the circumstances in it. The result of our intent is our heaven or our hell here on earth. It is our responsibility and ours alone to determine our intent toward life and how it can influence our response to what life offers us. I alone choose to paint my world with worry and anxiety, or trust and faith. We paint the world with our intent. It is the color of our nature, and with it we create the pattern or map we alone live by. Life thus becomes our own private creation, and should we choose to experience life in loving terms, it will be, indeed, heaven-like. If we choose to view or experience it otherwise, as in ego-consciousness, it surely can be our hell. Recently, I heard a story which illustrates this last point. As the story goes, two friends had decided to investigate moving to Boston together. They had a common friend there, and each separately decided to call her on their own to find out what life in Boston was really like. Barbara called first and told her friend Joan of the impending decision and asked what it was like to live in Boston. After telling her a few things about Boston, Joan asked Barbara what it was like where she lived now. Well, began Barbara, the apartment complex I live in is not really very nice. I don't have any close friends. The pastor of my church is a nerd. Crime is rampant, and all these ethnic groups really bother me. You know, said Joan, you're likely to find it that same way here in Boston. Later that night, Mary called Joan, and the same routine unfolded. But when Joan asked Mary to tell her about her community and where she lived, the same one as Barbara's, mind you, Mary responded by saying she was really ambivalent about moving because she had lots of friends. She especially liked the ethnicity of town, loved her pastor who was cheerful and caring, and she cherished her friends in the apartment building in which they now lived. Joan responded with, you know, Mary, you're likely to find it exactly the same way here in Boston. Indeed, attitude paints your days and relationships. Indeed, your attitude paints all aspects of life. It's your choice. If I want a life filled with love, I must choose the loving ways. There is no alternative. When I behave lovingly toward my fellow humans, love is returned manyfold. When I live without fear, my life streams unfold as miracles, providing solutions and gifts far better than I could have planned them to be. To the contrary, when I invest in living out of fear, my life is filled with lack, guilt, anxiety, poor relationships, and other manifestations of hellish return. When we finally come to realize that our authentic nature is loving, then our choices will create time and again a life that will be heaven on earth. Folks, there is no middle ground, no playing it safe in the life of the lover. As an illustration, the metaphor I described above placed me in the middle of the river called life that took an unusual turn in perspective. In January 1995, I was participating in a month-long program at the Pecos Benedictine Monastery in Pecos, New Mexico, to prepare people to become charismatic spiritual directors. After lunch one beautiful sunny day, I decided to take a long walk in the mountains in order to gain some solitude and a sense of where I was. Heading toward the bridge over the Pecos River, which means River of Life, I saw two people deep in conversation at the far end of the bridge and decided not to interrupt their space. Feeling an inner tug pulling me toward the near side of the bridge along the river, I followed that prompting and began moderately paced but nonetheless contemplative sojourn. Almost immediately I felt another tug, suggesting that I walk closer to the edge of the river along the freshly fallen snow. As I did, the beauty of the surroundings washed over me, and the river itself seemed to become the warming glow that now began to fill me. Before I realized what was happening, I found myself navigating my way to a richly textured beach, inhabited by thousands of stones of all sizes and descriptions. Why, I wondered, was I attracted to this spot? The response from within burst into understanding almost before the wonderment posed its question. The stones took on an entirely new dress, so to speak, appearing as human hearts that had turned to stone for one reason or another. It shook me, frankly. I'm convinced I could have named every stone on that beach. Their identity was that clear to me, of course, but which meant that I had gone through much of that same stress. One had been blackened by the oppression of all life was, another pitted by the stings of an insensitive spouse, still another split by a massive strike of unrequited love, yet another marbled by dedication to the fatty lifestyle of a materialistic society. All this seeped in as I pondered their meaning for me, one by one by one. As my mind's eye wandered, one stone in particular, with a human-like figure worn into its surface, caught my inner awareness. Cautiously, I bent over and picked it up. Close inspection revealed a figure praying with its hands folded neatly at the waist, its head turned almost cavalierly to one side. No matter how I tried to see it otherwise, the head stayed fixed in the sideward glance. Using active imagination, I began the dialogue with the figure on the stone. I only needed to begin for the answer to appear. I asked simply why its head was turned to the side, and the response was immediate and profound. I lived and prayed my life with indifference, and my heart ended up being turned to stone. Suddenly, I turned back to the larger boulder in the middle of the river, recognizing that it was not entirely in the river called life. Just as quickly, I realized that one is either in life or out of it. There is no real middle ground. My gaze then went to other stones totally immersed in the river, and they appeared as more fleshly counterparts of the beach variety. Their interaction, indeed, their interdependence with other beings, had produced the flesh that comes only out of devoted relationship, out of fully compassionate living, one for the other. Pardon me. My life metaphor changed before my very eyes as I stepped with both feet into the stream, symbolically committing myself to living totally in union with all life is. I had come to the realization that one is either in indifference or in love, and there is no in between, no halfway about it. Just as we are the journey that makes our life, we are like the stream that contributes to the making of the ocean. Later in the day, scripture from the book of Revelation affirmed the message. I know you well. You are neither hot nor cold. I wish you were one or the other, but since you are lukewarm, I will spit you out of my mouth. Quite an admonition, for sure. The thought came to me, as I have heard many times before, that stripping ourselves of whatever it is that keeps us from living fully what we really are is much like peeling an onion. In this case, our ego consciousness is the onion. When the last layer is peeled away, there is nothing left but a heart filled with love, our true reality. No other major realization served to reinforce the validity of this newly shaped life metaphor. The first dealt with a shift in perspective about the symbolism of Mary, the Virgin Mother, the so-called Virgin Mother of Jesus. Over the centuries, many, including myself, have had difficulty dealing with the idea of the virgin birth. But while contemplating this event, it came to me that virginity in a spiritual sense could well mean that Mary was spiritually pure. The purest receiver of love is lived by her Son, Jesus, fully accepting her Son's way of life, obeying the will of the voice heard in silence, which she labeled as God. Some label it intuition. For me, Mary took on the feminine symbol of pure, unadulterated, unabashed acceptance of our highest self in all its forms. When I placed that representation and concept into my womb of created relationship, my heart, my prayer for complete acceptance of all we truly are grew instantly to fruition. Remember that I was attending a program sponsored by the Pecos Benedictine Monastery, a Roman Catholic community, so at the time my thoughts were somewhat tempered by that context. The second realization, while contemplating the consecration of the bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ, imagine myself there at the Last Supper. I heard Jesus talk about our broken, that is, spiritual and emotional bodies, torn by the vagaries of what we call life. He likened our brokenness to the breaking of bread, of sharing our brokenness and companionship. He spoke of the flow of purest love that was necessary for healing to take place, and related that the flow of the finest wine of our winepress of heartfelt love, of our blood given up for another by stepping away from our ego in selfless giving of ourselves, that another may also live fully again. Broken bread and outpoured wine and broken bodies and flowing blood suddenly appeared as human beings opening themselves up to one another for compassionate mutual healing. In the depths of this meeting, the newfound understanding of the Virgin Mary, my commitment to the inner voice that speaks only in silence, became complete. No more was I willing to be indifference. I was suddenly and completely in love with loving in this new form. My perception of life and the metaphors that represented it took on a new look, both within and without. My heaven changed from seeing life somewhat as an external manifestations to seeing it as a continuous process of opening to and loving from within. One of the beautiful yet paradoxical truths in that gift of life is the gift of choice. We need not, after all, be stuck in our self-made hell or even our heaven, should we determine that the current form of one or the other is no longer needed or desired or proper for us. When he was no longer president, Harry S. Truman was asked if it was difficult for him to make all the very difficult decisions he had to face as President of the United States, particularly under such trying circumstances in history at that time. His answer was a simple one. No. I always knew all it takes to change things is one more decision. What a marvelous perspective, and one which can serve us well as we deal with life decisions. In order to create a change in perspective, we must first realize that we no longer want to view life in a certain way. We then ask ourselves what we want from life. It takes courage to face the need for change and to turn in some other direction. Once the new direction is known, however, it no longer takes courage, but loyalty or obedience to the task and commitment to our internal integrity. Our choice thus becomes whether we wish to see ourselves or the world around us as we always have, or take our vision to a deeper level or fresher perspective. As you have already seen on a number of issues throughout my life, changing perspective even slightly has made all the difference in the world in my outlook and their resolution. I shall touch briefly on two others that have had a major impact on my life. The first deals with my former understanding of death. This is a very heavy issue in most of our minds. For the longest time, it certainly was so in mine. Despite much work on this issue, I'm sure there are still fragments left to clear on my path. The earlier imagery was that commanding. I formerly dealt with death with fear in my heart, believing that when my body died, I died with it. Poof, there I went. And thinner like perspiration, as a TV ad used to say. And then one day I came to understand that I was not my body. I had a body. Just like I'm not fat, I have fat. A major change in perspective. I further became to see that life was not the other end of the continuum called death. Birth was. Bodies of all kinds are born. All the bodies eventually die. Ideas are born. They too die. Movements are born. They too find their end. Plants are born. They complete their cycle in their own time. The legacy is clear. Life itself never dies. Life is what we are by yet another name. It, and therefore we, continue throughout eternity. Indeed, we merely cast aside our physical cloak, just as we cast aside excess weight. Yet what I am remains the very same. Another perspective arises, and the fear along with the old perspective disappears. Birth and death. But life, my friends, goes on. The second example deals with how we come to identify with who or what we are. Preciseness of language is the concern here. For as humans, we sometimes need just a slight shift in intellectual understanding for a deeper intuitive shift to take place. Who is a descriptive term? What is essence? All throughout life, we take on descriptions of who we are. In many cases, the descriptions relate to roles we fill, to names or labels we take on: wife, lover, father, child, friend, lawyer, doctor. On another level, descriptions relate to how well we perform these roles: stubborn child, uncaring father, discerning friend, capable doctor. Within this framework, the determination of who I am takes on the language of comparison and contrast, of evaluation and judgmentalism. In certain circumstances, I have from time to time identified with who others thought I should be, in combination with the self-judgments I use to validate how well I fit their description of me. At times, so closely had I identified with others' view of me, that when I separated from my first wife, for example, I spent the next few years finding out my own real nature, my preferences, my real likes and dislikes, and deciding how I wish to manifest my highest good according to what I came to find in my heart to be my real identity, my innate character of being. Finally, it appeared to me that the main reason I had difficulty remembering what I am is I had learned so well to describe and live who I thought I was that I couldn't help but think in comparing and contrasting terms. The apparent dualism of life. Consciously or not, I saw myself as fatter or thinner, taller or shorter, smarter or dumber, better or worse. Moving on, I set out on life much like an artist continually trying to paint a self-portrait I could accept and love, consciously or unconsciously using a model external to myself with which to compare or contrast myself, and to make the judgments thereabout. After all, my parents, spouse, children, friends, enemies, church, and TV provided and served as examples of who I should be. Sure enough, a part of me identified with one or more of those examples, even changed them from day to day, moment to moment, continually trying to paint myself as a this or a that. In a way, I busied myself doing all I could to prove my worth rather than just being what I am, through all I did, and knowing that that was the truth of the matter. That's how many of us become human doings rather than living as the spiritual beings we are. By loving through all we do, being loving through all we do is our only task. When we instead reduce ourselves to mere doings, we demean the sacred beings we are, both individually and collectively. One day I learned I could never achieve the real image of who I was because the only colors on my palette were the colors of dualism, and they are always relative, even though they seem to be well-defined extremes of the same order of things. I began to question the illusion of possible perfection I had created for myself. I finally understood the futility of painting myself as a who, realizing I was no more nor less than a what, or the very essence that life is. I made an internal shift when I further understood that essence really cannot be described. Essence just is. All there is. It cannot be judged or evaluated. In the final analysis, I came to realize that I had learned what the ultimate artistic endeavor is. It certainly was not identifying with and hopelessly painting over and over again who I am. No, it is being an artist of living what I am in the moment, each moment of my life. During my last year of full-time teaching, after I decided to leave my position as the chancellor of a university, I was blessed with two classes of talented, bright graduate students in education. The courses were in history and philosophy of education. I had learned from my earlier ventures in teacher education that it was impossible to really teach others until I had a good understanding of myself. So I certainly didn't want these folks to try leading youngsters to their truth if they hadn't crossed the threshold to know their very own. The idea for each student to gradually build a personal philosophy of education that could be manifested in their life work and with students was the goal. After working on mutual trust and building confidence for the first few weeks, I told the class at the end of one session that the next week they would be asked to answer 3 questions. Pardon me. Being the competitive people they were, they immediately wanted to know what the questions would be, how they should prepare for them, how much time they would have to answer them, and, of course, how much they would count toward their final grade. Oh, Lordy help us. No grade. We'll just have fun learning from this. And you have spent your whole life preparing to answer these questions, so just relax and trust me. You can imagine the moans I got in response. At the beginning of the next week, I wrote the questions on the chalkboard and told the class they had a total of 10 minutes to answer all 3. Again, some moans, but they quickly set about their task. The 3 questions: what am I? Second question: what is my purpose in life? Third question: how am I to manifest that purpose? All in 10 minutes. The reason for the short time was that I wanted them to operate from the truth of their intuition, not to have time to think up some convoluted, made-up textbook answer they thought I wanted to hear. Previously, I had taken a brief time to explain the difference between the words who and what, so at least they had that to go on. For the most part, the responses were astounding. The next week, without revealing the authors, I read each response, giving time for each to sink in and to discuss points of interest. I had never seen a group of people move so deeply as were many of those students. Amidst some unabashed oohs and ahs, tears flowed. Some became entranced by the depths of the responses. Others just shook their head in amazement. Many had not gone to those depths before, had not thought or responded in such terms. Over the next few weeks, we built on those responses, helped one another see how they could use their new understanding to lead learners to know and express themselves authentically, just as they were now learning to do. Their final working statements of philosophy, 2 pages maximum, were very strong. Pardon me, I think I need to take a sip of water. Thank you. Let's see here. Being able to discern the real difference between the who and what of life made it possible for them to begin living more authentically and to create designs for helping others do likewise. Try this exercise yourself and see what you come up with. It may be an eye-opener for you. Actually, I'm willing to bet that it will be. Life has taught me that as human beings, we sometimes need to discern these fine shades of language so our mind can make a slight, yet sometimes dramatic, shift in perspective. When that happens, our soul, though through intuition and insight, also shifts, and we are free to receive the gift of enlightenment. It was there all along, by the way. We've just been hiding from it. In this case, what's at stake is living either by I am who I am, or I am what I am. What rings with more integrity for me is what. When I am who I am, I really am only what I think I am, or who I think others want me to be. When I am what I am, I just am. All my illusions fall to the side, and I'm free to just be my authentic, creative, loving, spiritual being under any conditions, in any circumstances. I call this living in grace. In reality, when we come to transcend who I am and become what I am in all our expressions and all the roles we find ourselves playing in this drama called life, it's an amazing difference. At this point, however, the roles are merely that, seen clearly as only parts in a drama. We no longer tolerate artificiality in our lives, for our true inner self and outward manifestations of self become one, and one is genuine, our innate reality. The veils of our own illusory creations lift and we finally see ourselves as authentic beings. The roles we formerly identify with we no longer do, no matter who, including ourselves, attempts to place encumbrances on our soul. This too is grace. Unfortunately, because of the lack of overt teaching related to such matters, we often stumble through life, confused by what we do and do not think or feel, until we are sent some message, seemingly from nowhere, that tips us off that we are at dis-ease with our view of the real world. This is like a knock at the door to the truth of the soul that we can either attend to or ignore. Of course, if we are at all aware, we realize that it hurts far more in the long run to ignore the knock, for the depths behind that door hold our truth. The door is always unlocked, but our inner truth only shows itself when we are aware. When invited, endless dimensions of awareness will sit side by side with us through all our tribulations. Our truth then is recognized as the great reality within, and if we choose to use its perspective from which to view our life, it can unfold in some form as our great reality without. Such is the case in our relationships with other people and with things. We come to understand the meaning of our lives in a society which, by its pace of living, its preoccupation with consumerism and extrinsic reward systems, teaches us not only that our self-worth is judged quantitatively, but that our value must be earned again by aligning ourselves with things external to us. Hence, if I live according to a system of external validation for determining my worth, I come to believe that my personal worth and value is fixed by the likes of job, personal appearance, the expectations of others, my collections of goods, and an alliance with an endless array of false idols, things we worship external to ourselves, rather than accepting myself whole merely because I am whole. In this fallen state, I become able to truly see and hear. I have eyes to see, but see not, ears to hear, but hear not. I become unaccepting of my inner life, forgetting my right to find my real heaven on earth. And so, folks, I think I'm going to, in the middle of that chapter, I'm afraid I'm leaving you a little bit in hell. But then again, it depends how you perceive where I've left you. I hope that this has been helpful. It's a rich undertaking if you allow it to be. Okay, I like to end these sessions by finding or by citing a post that I've seen somewhere between the times we're together. And this one is short and it's a little cutish, but it's okay. It works fine. Here it is. Don't judge someone just because they sin differently than you. Ooh. Don't judge someone just because they sin differently than you. Well, there you are, folks. You contemplate that or not. I hope that you'll take what we've done so far today in preparation for next week. Sit with it, try it, see where it takes you. Until then, I hope you stay well and that you're very, very happy with your life. Be grateful every day, folks, and you will indeed see that your life is changing dramatically for the good. Okay then, until next week, namaste. I love you.